you so much for coming. My name is Kristy Siefkin, and as a former meteorologist, I am thrilled to be moderating the panel today with David, who not only has extensive experience in space exploration, but he is a physicist, he is an executive, and he is an entrepreneur. And David's background ranges from working with the Department of Defense to NASA, and now he works obviously here at ASU with the MILO Institute. You may also know of David, but don't know specifically of the incredible accomplishments that he had during COVID. Does anybody remember when there was a rollout, a 6-day rollout of the vaccine that the vaccine developed here at ASU's campus? David was the man responsible for that. He was able to deploy a COVID vaccination process that even President Biden mentioned was a stellar example.
A dose of hope.
A dose of hope. That was soundbite if I ever heard one. A dose of hope. So his background is varied, he is brilliant, and most importantly, he has a huge heart. So I'm excited to have him with us today to talk about things that we can do to take better care of our planet and to learn about MILO Institute. Before we do that though, David, how did you get into space? How was this passion born?
So space is really interesting. In fact, it's one of those things where you can almost imagine everyone at some point in their life has looked up into the sky, they've looked at the stars, and they've asked some very deep questions like, wow, I mean, this is big, where am I, where do I fit in this? And so there's this inspiration. It's also a challenge. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that we're at an inflection point, where space is no longer this thing that is only for the few, only for those few astronauts that have the opportunity to go. Space is now something where anyone can actually get involved. That's exciting to me. So I love it for its opportunity.
Wonderful. So you started your career as a physicist, went the entrepreneurial route, became an executive. Now that you're at MILO, explain to us what MILO Institute does in simple terms.
So the MILO Institute is really all about creating access to space. It's really creating a pathway for that thing that I just mentioned. Now that we are at this point in time where space is accessible, how do we make that real to the non-traditional participants, universities, companies, startups, who may not have a background in space, they may not have a background in STEM? How do we make it such that they are able to go? So we have a series of programs from capacity building for emerging countries to new initiatives, and we'll talk a little bit about those.
Wonderful. Who here remembers learning about the space race in school? Back when there were textbooks. I learned recently that students don't have textbooks anymore, which made me feel very old. But we think of the race to the moon or interplanetary exploration as being a competition, something that countries are trying to pit against each other to get there first, to discover things first. The model you've adopted is the opposite. It is crowdsourcing resources and collaborating internationally. Why this shift and why is that important?
Yeah, so we're motivated by our charter, and I clicked the wrong button here, but our charter at ASU is truly motivation for many people, including myself. There's two things that are really important about the charter that Dr. Crow's put forward. One, we measure our success by who we include, not by who we exclude. And number two, we take fundamental responsibility for the communities we serve. So if I'm going to Ecuador or Morocco and I'm engaging with programming, I have a responsibility for that region's success. And so the way that we then are able to pull this off is with infrastructure as a service, so new models. So we think about the moon. I now have the ability with Lockheed Martin to offer the trip to the moon and the entire infrastructure is provided as a service. The launch, the landing, the mobility, the energy, the ability to survive the very cold temperatures of the winter night. And so the individual, perhaps a university program, perhaps a startup, can focus on putting their instrument, their capability, their innovation on the surface of the moon. They don't have to worry about the rest of the infrastructure. This is a game changer.
I'm going to have you expand on that a bit. In case people didn't catch this, you are providing all of the infrastructure for people to deliver their payloads, do their research, without having to invest in creating their own programs.
That's right. In addition to the infrastructure, at ASU, we're incredibly fortunate. We have faculty who have instruments floating around the solar system. They've been taking measurements on Mars for decades. We have some of the highest fidelity images of the moon, and we're able to offer assistance for those people who have never been there. So we think about the way that space has been accomplished in the past. You have these big agencies. You have NASA, you have the European Space Agency, JAXA, and they are risk averse because they have to be. Their mission must succeed. And so therefore they only select those people who have space heritage. So if you don't have space heritage, if you don't have a legacy, how do you participate? So we're opening the doors to everyone. You don't have to have heritage. We'll assist you with our faculty who have this extraordinary experience. And that's how we're creating access here in the clinic.
Can you give us some examples of other countries, other organizations that are collaborating through MILO?
Goodness, we just came from a big conference, one of the largest in the world, last week. We're engaging with the Canadians, and we've assisted their supply chain. We're working with the United Kingdom. We're working with folks in Australia. The group that just received the award for the Australian rover, we're going to be supplying the workforce development to train their teams on how to engage in lunar environments. We're working in Morocco, in the United Arab Emirates, in Ecuador, and there's a tremendous desire globally to participate in space. It's an exciting time.
As we look at these collaborations and we look at some of your points of pride, they are connected to collecting this data. So let's transition a little bit to the satellites. You have a collaboration with Planet Labs, and if you're not familiar with Planet Labs, they have over 200 satellites that are orbiting the globe every day and getting a full picture every 90 minutes of Earth. I believe 11 terabytes of data is downloaded every single day of these pictures, and it's being used to become better stewards of our planet. Can you talk to us about the work that you're doing at ASU that is helping us become better stewards?
Indeed, this is something that we've recognized, and other leaders here at ASU have recognized. This is an important time in history. We know that things are changing. We look at the rainfall in California just the last 6 to 7 months. We look at the storms and the increasing veracity of the storms. We look at the droughts, and we know things are happening. We know things are changing. And we want to be able to support those organizations, those individuals who desire to be stewards of what they have. So we're working with organizations. In fact, we have a wonderful partnership with an organization in Ecuador, and they are working in the area. They have actually a reserve in the rainforest, the Amazonian rainforest. So we're working on a program with them to help train them on how they can look at this reserve, to manage its resources, to make sure that it's healthy. But then if we start thinking about other markets, there are many markets that are going to be impacted and are being impacted by space. In agriculture, we can think about crop health. We can think about hydration. We can actually look and see when disease enters a crop, and that allows us to be monitors and managers at a level that we've never had before. This supports things like hunger in the United Nations SDGs. We can actually encourage appropriate hydration, fertilization, management of crops so that we have more food for more people and we affect a greater portion of the population from space.
You brought up an outstanding point here, that this is not just about supporting the planet from an environmental perspective, but it is about the humanitarian crises that are emerging because of food scarcity, because of issues with wildfires, lack of water. What do you see as the long-term impact from a social responsibility standpoint?
So there's so many elements that are intertwined, and they impact one another. So we think about food scarcity and water scarcity or security. This will create conflict. Conflict creates migrations of populations. We're already seeing this now, where there are large numbers of people who are displaced. And I feel like we have a responsibility, or have a sense of a burden, to do whatever we can to assist these vulnerable populations, but not just the extremely vulnerable, but we have this moment in time where people that have access to data from space are going to have advantages. How do we share those advantages with more people? And so this is, again, just a tremendous opportunity for us to provide the ability to manage our resources better to countries around the world.
This has to become rather emotional at a point for you. When we spoke prior to today, I could tell you're so passionate about this, about the impact you're having on humanity. And you brought up earlier ASU's mission to be inclusive. This isn't just about our community in Arizona, it's about the globe. When you work with these countries that potentially did not have the resources, the finances to do this on their own, what's the feedback you're getting from them? What sort of statements of gratitude are you hearing?
Oh, it's phenomenal. And frankly, this is sort of my own story. I'm first to graduate my family from a university. I had no idea that I could do applied physics, but I had a few people that opened doors for me. And so now this creates a sense of connection to others around the world who may have something inside, but they don't see themselves in this place of being able to participate in space, for example, or entrepreneurship. And so what we're providing is that bridge for those millions of people around the world that they have a dream, they have a passion, they have something inside that's sort of pushing them forward. And I think the folks in this room and the folks that will be coming here this week have that same drive and passion. And they're looking for opportunities. And so that's what we're doing, is we're attempting to create a pathway for those who have not had that opportunity in the past.
Beautifully said. I want to circle back to some of those examples of how the imagery is used, how the data is used. David and I were speaking before today about an article that came out in BuzzFeed. This was in March of 2019. Does anybody remember what one of the BuzzFeed journalists saw in China? Does this ring a bell for anybody? So there was a journalist, and do you remember? Okay, go ahead, Mark. That may be another one. We're going to bring you up to talk about that next. So based on this data that was collected by satellite, one of these journalists found internment camps in China. And looking at these satellites going around the globe, they ended up exposing these horrific conditions. So social justice obviously can be achieved through this. But from an environmental standpoint, and you have some great graphics in the first slide, the first deck you sent me. Can you show us some of those pictures of comparing fields and crops, comparing water? Because it's these types of images as these satellites are going around every day that inform huge changes.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really fascinating because we know that the ecosystem is intertwined, and we know things like deforestation are bad. But what we're starting to realize is how bad this really is, because there's actually a correlation between deforestation and increase in the population of mosquitoes that bear diseases. So deforestation produces an increase in malaria. It also changes.
Say that one more time, David, it's really important.
So there's a correlation, and this is found in Latin America, in Paraguay actually, where deforestation creates localized temperature changes that are favorable for mosquitoes. Mosquitoes carry diseases like malaria. So deforestation is actually correlated now to an increase in malaria. So this brings it home. It's not just an idealistic kind of thing. This is really for our physical well-being, that we need to be able to monitor deforestation. There's some great examples too of success stories. I'm going to go through these real quick. But just to give you an idea of what happens with the rain that we saw in California, this is over a 6-month period. You can physically measure the hydration in the lakes. You can also begin to see positive stories. For example, this one in New Zealand, where there was a mine on the image to the left, and they began to look at ways of recovering, and in a few years they were able to do so. So this is the time we're in, and we have many opportunities when we think about mining, we think about insurance. Insurance companies now are able to measure the height of a building to a millimeter scale. So in Ecuador, there are mountains that have been mined for many decades, and there's so many mine shafts in the mountains are settling. And so insurance companies can measure that settling and say, we shouldn't build here, it's too dangerous. And so these are ways in which we can engage using space data.
Larry Fink with BlackRock is quoted saying that climate risk is an investment risk, which circles back to your previous statement. Insurance companies hopefully care about the well-being of people, but we know they're looking at the bottom line as well. How much of the collaboration you're seeing through MILO is driven by finances versus social good?
So about 60% of the space economy is commercial. And so we can think of, we know that sort of Earth-observing commercial opportunities. We look at Starlink and we look at Kuiper and some of these other things. But we also have opportunities in space. We look at the semiconductor industry. We look at companies that are creating new instruments and opportunities. And so these are, they're now talking about lunar markets, and there are companies who are being formed that are going to build habitats for the lunar record. I spoke with a company in Germany that's able to spin the lunar dust into maps and create roads. And there's just an enormous amount of energy and innovation that's going into what we're seeing. I think it's worth also pointing out, Kristy, that again, just how important this moment is in time. And this image displays this quite well. If we look at this is an image of Cape Canaveral just a few months ago. The SLS rocket was Artemis 1. Actually, HQ had an instrument on the top of Artemis 1. But simultaneously, there was a SpaceX Falcon 9 that was carrying a Dragon capsule to the space station. And what people don't realize is the disparity in cost that's represented by this image. So you're looking at a $4.1 billion rocket in SLS with a price tag per launch per kilogram of over $150,000. And SpaceX, the Falcon 9, is just over $2,500 per kilogram. That's dramatic enough. But the one that was terminated in Texas, when it finally is successful, it's going to have a price tag of $100 per kilogram to get things into space. This is a game changer. Again, universities, companies will be able to put things into space. And frankly, I applaud the risk-taking of SpaceX as they're not afraid to try new things and really truly change the curve.
So I love that you brought this up, David. Share for us again the cost, if people can't see it on the screen, the cost of SLS versus what we're looking at with SpaceX.
So SLS, and this is a multi-decade program, $4.1 billion for that rocket. That doesn't count the development cost. It's into the 50+ billion range. That's great. But it's almost obsolete after its first launch. And SpaceX, the private company, has created a launch vehicle that's putting up Starlink and many other things at a fraction of the cost. So SLS has a launch cost, $150,000 per kilogram. SpaceX Falcon 9, $2,700 per kilogram, and the next heavy lift vehicle will be a launch cost of $100 per kilogram.
$100 per kilogram. Unbelievable. And you mentioned exploring the moon. How many people here would go if they had the opportunity? I didn't ask you. Do you have any interest?
I would love to go. Frankly, I love exploring. I love trying new things. How about yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Let's go get together. But for those who are interested, let's talk about the moon for a little bit, because the focus of you are observing Earth, but you're also dialing into the moon. Talk to me about the opportunity of rideshare to the moon. What do you know about that?
So again, we're changing the way that we think about space exploration. We're changing the way we get to the moon, where an individual or a company can focus on an instrument. But what's going to happen on the moon is you have these reserves of water that are frozen in the permanently shattered regions. Water is oxygen and hydrogen. These are the components of fuel. So there are companies who are thinking about extracting oxygen and hydrogen and actually creating rocket fuel for launches from the moon to Mars. There are people who are thinking about, well, how do we get there? So some of these permanently shattered regions are in the South Pole, which is where NASA's going to go for the human mission, Artemis 3. First female astronaut to step foot on the moon, will be on Artemis 3. And so there are these wonderful exploration opportunities. So what people don't realize is that some of this water is at the bottom of craters that are 3.5 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. So it takes a tremendous amount of innovation just to get there, just to be able to extract it, and in the process, people are thinking about habitats, energy. I've talked to an organization in Korea who's thinking about charging stations on the moon. And so all of this is being planned as we speak, and the opportunities to participate in new and exciting ways.
I hope their charging station availability is better than here. I read an article the other day saying there was 26% of charging stations for vehicles here don't function. So if you have a renewable, or if you have an electric vehicle and you're having issues, that's why. But in terms of moon exploration, this kind of ties into one of the many programs that MILO has to get people prepared to go to the moon or to do space exploration. Can you give a taste to our audience of those different programs in case they want to get involved?
Indeed. So we have at ASU a workforce development program that's been created for NASA. We've done this for 3.5 years. Over 7,000 students have gone through. But what's really amazing is the who it brings into space. So we're able to access students from all backgrounds. They don't have to have a STEM degree. 93% completion rate. 40% of these students are female. 41% are from underrepresented communities. And these are numbers that NASA really just dreams about. We're reaching into the next generation. And what's really amazing is the stories that we get back from the students are not like, hey, I learned about systems engineering, or I learned about launch. They're saying, this changed my life. This actually made me believe that I can participate in space. And so that's what we're doing with our workforce development program. We have commerce programs. We're encouraging entrepreneurship in space. And then we have exploration programs like the lunar mission that we have talked about with Lockheed Martin, where we actually can use one of these containers that's on the vehicle in the middle. We integrate payloads from universities, from companies, and we assist with mission assurance and make sure that it'll work on the moon, and we provide the infrastructure.
What's the most interesting payload combination that you've seen so far?
So I think the most interesting one, and perhaps just for the shock factor, was one of the major U.S. beer companies sent seeds to the space station.
Seeds?
They grew barley.
To make beer?
To make beer in space. And also to produce space. But one must have beer in space.
And how's it going?
Apparently, from all indications, it's going quite well.
I love that. Can you tell us what the company is? It is Budweiser. All right. As we look towards the future and people continuing to get more involved accessing this data, whether it's through, Planet Labs data is, you have to pay to have it, but there are resources for all of us in this room to see the data. Can you tell us where we can find it and how we can use it?
There's so many resources. I have a few on a slide here. And so some of these are the Planet, but also Google Earth Engine. You can check it out. It has access to many satellites. There's a group in Australia that's created something called Digital Australia. Now they're expanding into other parts of the world. Maxar, Digital Globe. There are a number of sources, and I really want to encourage our audience to begin thinking about how do you gain access to this. You can look at your own backyard if you would like. But also, how do you use this in your business? How do you use this in your community? How do we use this to monitor our own resources? How do we use space data to be good stewards of what we have, because we're going to need to be in this time. And so there are growing opportunities in artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analysis to extract features, to really understand what it is that matters. We're working with an organization in the United Kingdom that's able to use AI to predict deforestation and to actually analyze regions that are subject to this kind of thing. So lots happening.
For those in the room who are saying, I want to get involved with this, I want to get involved with ASU, with your programs, what's the next step for them?
So certainly look at the MILO Space Science Institute. There are other programs as well. There are over 200 faculty at ASU who are working on space. But we're also working with the Global Futures Laboratory, which has people looking at coral reefs, they're looking at hydration and water management from Earth, from terrestrial carbon sequestration. There's so much happening here. You can find something that resonates with you, you can get involved. And the teams would love to speak.
David, when you and I first chatted via Zoom, I didn't get to meet David in person until today. He's as delightful as he was on Zoom. You mentioned a trip you took to Ecuador and speaking to students who thought there isn't a place for me in space. I am not in STEM. I want to be an artist or I want to be a neurosurgeon. What is the message you have for those who think, I don't have the background, this field isn't for me?
You know, so that's something to me that's very special about space is it reaches so many domains. So one young student was saying, hey, I'm an artist. How would I participate in space? I said, okay, I want you to imagine something. Right now, there are 4 commercial space stations that are being built. And maybe not all will fly, but some of them. And some of these space stations are going to allow tourism. So imagine you're a space tourist. You're going to one of these space stations, and you're on the launch pad. What is your playlist? And you begin to rattle off some calming music, and that's cool, that's great. So what is your fashion that you're going to wear in space to, the dinner? And so all of these are sort of opportunities for us to create new avenues to express what we all enjoy and have inside. But the one reference that you made, I think, is fascinating. As a neurosurgeon student, and she's like, how do I participate in space? And I said, well, think about this. The astronauts on the moon are 3 days away from an emergency. One trips and falls, there's damage. Do they have 3 days? It's not sure. We now have the opportunity with virtual reality and robotics to do remote surgery. So can you imagine yourself putting on your Oculus headset and actually doing neurosurgery in a virtual scenario where you see your patient? That patient's actually on the moon. This is our future reality.
Not even our future, it is happening right now. It begs the question, David, what is your playlist and what is your outer space outfit?
So I'm a big fan of classical music, and I've got some really good ones lined up. I think Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto will happen.
And are you wearing this or something else?
Oh, no, I think
something comfortable.
Something comfortable, but one of the things you've seen in these suits that have come out, and they're becoming more cool, shall we say. The suits are becoming more wearable, and we look better.
So fashion for even when you're headed to outer space.
That's right.
What are you most proud about as being a part of MILO?
So I think this is really, a statement to the issue. What we have before us is an opportunity to have impact on a global scale. And we use space as the draw. But what we're doing is we're inspiring large numbers of people to think about what's possible, to imagine a future that may seem like a dream, and we create the pathway to make it a reality. That's very special. We're creating impact at a scale that only imagined in the past. And that's only because of the massive resources that we have access to, the community that's here in Phoenix, the innovation that's occurring, the growth. We have a unique opportunity to do really, really good things here in the world.
And you're collaborating not just globally, but locally here in the U.S., and you have a special visitor today from, I believe, Los Angeles that you're working with. Would you like to share a little about that?
Yeah, we're very excited about this partnership with Equity Space Alliance. We have signed an agreement, and we're going to be doing a formal signing at 2:30 in the afternoon. Would you like to join us? And Equity Space Alliance is a group that I'm personally motivated by, inspired by, and we have common goals, and their goal in particular is to make space accessible to historically marginalized communities. So minority-owned institutions, Black-owned businesses, how do we create the future for them that we have in front of us today and make them understand that they too can achieve their dreams. So this is a worthy endeavor. We're going to be doing events around the country with Equity Space Alliance. The first one's going to be in July in Cincinnati at Black Tech Week. I invite you all to join. And again, we're going to be doing the same thing for our own marginalized communities, saying you too can participate in space.
Fantastic. There's a graphic in your deck. I'm going to cue you now to find it for us, David, of outer space, the big blue marble as we look back at Earth. And you shared such an amazing sentiment with me when we spoke, that you consistently hear the same thing from astronauts as they look back at Earth. What is it?
Yeah, and I actually have validated this, so it's not just my own understanding, but other people have validated this too. But astronauts that go into space, to the space station, to the moon, there is overwhelmingly one thing that they come back and they say, and that is, when I got to space and I looked back at Earth, I saw no boundaries. There were no borders. And that is compelling. That is compelling.
And it speaks to your mission in general, which is that we are supporting this entire global community, not just Arizona, here at ASU.
That's correct, that's right. And especially in Arizona, we have an opportunity with ASU, with the University of Arizona, with NMU, all of our world leaders in space in different areas. And glad to share more of the details about that. We live in a very unique place and competitive globally. Two of the universities that I mentioned are in the top 10 in NASA funding. Together, we have extraordinary capability.
I'm amazed you said NAU and ASU in the same breath.
Actually, got good friends at ASU.
I love that. It's all about inclusivity, no hatred here. David, it has been a delight to speak with you. This is going to be it for our questions on stage, but you have time to take questions from the audience. This is your chance to ask David any pressing question you have about space exploration, about traveling to the moon, about planetary stewardship, about sustainability, once he gets a chance for a sip of water. So what questions do we have for David? I know there have to be some.
An expert on space? Come on.
Oh, we have a question here. I'll bring the mic to you. Oh, you got it? Okay.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Always a big fan of your work and everything like that.
What's your name? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Ricky. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much.
I'm a PhD student at ASU, also a local entrepreneur, so definitely involved in the scene. I'm really curious, David, as you go and continue on with the work of MILO, what are you perceiving the biggest challenges about kind of crossing these borders and fostering that ecosystem of collaboration to really make impactful change in the space?
So we're also very pragmatic. And, one of the things that's really fascinating about the U.S., and you can find the charts, is if you look at the investment money that's invested in the U.S. in space, it's extraordinary. I mean, the next 5 countries in the world don't add up with their investments in space to what the U.S. does. And so the challenge is, how do we sponsor, how do we fund even small things like the Workforce Development Program? So one of the recent trips that I made to Latin America was really to validate there is indeed a funding path to do the things that we're doing outside of this incredible place that we live in. And indeed there are. So we found the funding channels. There are many diverse funding sources that we can tap into. That's got to be the biggest one. Obviously, law and policy follows closely. If a country has a very good legal system, it's an important step. If they don't, we're going to run into trouble. So we're actually having to teach and build capacity in these areas. Thanks for Kristy.
I have a question for you connected to Ricky's question. Give us an idea of the investments that countries are making from the low end to the high end.
So, one of the things that I run into on a regular basis is I have all of these issues at home. Why should I invest in space? And so here we've managed to get the cost down for our Workforce Development Program to about the same price as an online course at ASU. And so we're able to deploy this virtually and with live presenters. That's a challenge in many countries. And so, $400 or $500 per student turns out to be something that people struggle with in other countries. And I'll have to pull the numbers. The amount of resources spent in the United States is extraordinary. And for good reason. I mean, we're leading the world, we're inspiring the world. The next 4 or 5 after us, Japan, Russia, China, United Kingdom, you add all of them up, the European Union, and they're not able to spend as much as we do in the U.S. And so there's an extraordinary spirit.
Do you have a ballpark figure you can share with us of the U.S. investment?
I don't, because it's complicated. It's like
Understood.
so I can give you NASA numbers and so forth, but there's a lot going on with Space Force.
All right, Ricky was the brave leader with the questions. Who else has a question? Yep, we got one over here. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm actually a reporter with the ASU State Press, so hopefully you don't mind if I record this. So today is the Sustainability Day with the PHX Startup Week. So I wanted to know, how does the MILO Center incorporate sustainability into its overall goals?
So we're looking at ways of using space data to support sustainable agriculture. How do we minimize the amount of water that's needed to create a healthy crop? We're able to train organizations to teach students and so forth. So not just health monitoring, but you think about what we're looking at with climate change. And I mentioned some of the hurricanes that we've seen recently. The veracity of storms is remarkable. So disaster relief. Can we predict low-lying areas that are going to need support before a hurricane even arrives? And after it does, can we see where there's damage? The answer is yes. And you can pull these examples up on Planet or Google Earth Engine or many others. Forest fires. There's actually, we are certainly at risk in Arizona with forest fires. The majority of acres burned by forest fires are started by lightning. And not just lightning, but a very specific type of lightning that we can actually monitor from space. So we're working with Lockheed Martin, who has created the GOES satellite, GOES, which is an acronym which I have no idea what it means, and it monitors weather, including lightning strikes. And the idea is we would like to work with them to create an early warning system. Can we identify where a lightning strike has occurred before the fire is out of hand, while it's still just in smoldering stages? These are just one of many ways that we can work together. But I think what we can do best is create a platform for innovation and unleash the intellectual capacity of students to identify the problems in their own community, give them the resources to create the solution. That's what we excel.
Did that answer your question? Excellent. I'm glad you're out here reporting today. We appreciate you. What other questions? Anything that you want to add, David?
So, there's a lot that's happening in the world today, and I think that sometimes we get distracted. We're busy, and if you can identify opportunities to think about what's happening in some of these emerging spacefaring countries, in the Middle East and Latin America, I think as you begin to hear the real life stories. I was in Saudi Arabia in December. We signed an agreement there, and I had a lady from the Ministry of Education and another lady who ran an organization which is a female university came to me and they said, David, we have hundreds of female students that are ready to participate in your program. We have before us an opportunity to change lives, and to, especially for those who have had barriers in the past. And so I encourage everyone to look out, to look into your own communities outside of our own busy lives and really begin to understand what's happening around us. So there's a lot of opportunity. It doesn't take a lot to make a difference.
Yes, please. We've got one question up here in the front row. Oh, no, you can stand, you can do whatever you want.
Hi, Janae Griffin with Equity Space Alliance, so we're going to be arguing.
Thank you for coming today.
Yes, thank you so much. And David and I have had numerous conversations, but I think one question that I have that I think would also be helpful with the audience, just people that are tuning in, is, MILO is doing such a great job with reaching out to the communities and figuring out ways to get people involved in, the new space economy and what's coming. What can some other companies or institutions or organizations that have the same type of backing and support that MILO has do to really do their part? Because this is a global effort, right? Which is why you're traveling, to these different countries to kind of help them and get them involved as well. But for folks who, are wondering, like, well, what can I do or what should I do? What is some of the advice that you would give them, or maybe best practices that you can share?
Yeah, great point. I have three elements I want to respond to you with. One, There was a wonderful report by McKinsey about a month ago, and basically the premise of the report was if the company that you're working for doesn't already have a space strategy, it's like every industry will be affected. We can think of ourselves as in a time period similar to right after World War II, where the central government invested in aircraft for the war, and then the civilian airline industry was formed after that. That's a really good analogy of where we are now with space, but there's been this extraordinary investment from the government into creating all of this infrastructure. Now companies are going to take over. So if the company doesn't have a space program or strategy, they're late. If they don't have a program for equity in space, they're late. And they need to think about what are the jobs that they have in their catalog that are supporting not just space, but equity in space. What are the training programs that they're working with that are going to fill those jobs? What opportunities do they have with universities and others to encourage students to see themselves in new positions and new jobs that are focused on planetary stewardship? Where are the jobs for space? Where are the jobs for planetary stewardship? And I think these jobs probably don't exist to the extent that they need to be. I'll give you another example. The Bank of America says that the space economy is going to be about 1.1 trillion in 2030. That is about the same size as global tourism. So I can imagine the jobs in global tourism, airlines, shipping, and so forth. I don't yet see the jobs in planetary stewardship in space. So we have an opportunity.
I love what you just shared, and it begs a question for this audience here today. We are at Startup Week. So these are companies that many of us are startups. We're in the infancy stages. If you're a small-sized company, what can you be doing right now to prepare for the future of space and make sure your company is ready to compete?
So I always encourage, we're in this transition period, and we're not quite over the inflection point. And so I encourage companies to come up with a terrestrial application for your space company. So what is the robotics? What are the artificial intelligence algorithms? What are the exploration capabilities that could support mining, remote mining, or agriculture, or livestock, or aerial surveys, or you name it. And the company really should have a terrestrial application that's going to help them bring in revenue to kind of keep the company alive as we transition into a more fully commercial market. We're not quite there yet. We still need subsidies. We still need the government, but it will happen. And it's going to happen in a big way in the next few years. So you're at this moment in time, and having that dual use capability is really true.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Yes, we got a couple. Got one in the front, and I think one back there as well.
Hi, my name is Chris with Scooter Operations. My question is, can you delve into the space economy? I don't really understand it just from my background. I don't know any astronauts. I don't, like I'm just a
He can introduce you to some.
like I live here. What is up there that we need is so valuable that we can bring back here? Is there a pot of gold? I don't. Like, I understand that it's a shiny object, we all want to go, but what's the goal?
It's such a great question. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. So I'll start with here on Earth, right? Uber Eats is able to exist because of satellites, right? Lyft, our rideshare companies were formed because they have access to GPS, they can find me, and they can create a traverse that's optimized to get me to the next location. That's all from space. And of course, now the phones, my phone has a satellite texting system. So if you're in an emergency, you don't have cell service today, it will actually send a text to a satellite and back down. And so now imagine in future communication, what that's going to mean. We look at education around the world in remote areas. And Starlink is changing things. We look at Ukraine and the war and conflict with Russia and how that gave them situational awareness. And they have been able to protect themselves in ways I think has surprised the world, in large part because they can see the battlefield using Starlink. And so these are just a few examples. So there's a space-to-earth commerce, communication, most of your entertainment systems are beamed down from what are called geostationary satellites. They kind of sit at one location and they follow the Earth around in its rotation. And so our media is all being beamed to us from satellite. And that's going to grow. You're going to have space-to-space commerce. There are now companies being formed that are going to service satellites, refuel them. Maybe there's debris, so I need to pull it into the gravity field to allow it to burn up. And then there's lunar markets, and these are a little bit in growth stage. We're not quite sure what's going to happen. But we know that something cool is going to happen. What are the exchanges? What are the transactions that are going to occur on the moon? What's valuable on the moon? The same thing is valuable here, right? Food, water, shelter. The ability to build a shelter at a latitude on the moon because it has the best temperature for human life. If you can conquer that one, somebody will pay you to do that. So there are commerce, transactional opportunities that we're just now beginning to imagine as we go deeper and deeper into space. And Mars is already being talked about.
And I think there's one more question up here.
Oh, we actually have to wrap this up this session.
Okay.
Let's give it up for Kristy and Dave. Thank you so much.